In this section, we're going to start to take a look at the claims of the Bishop of Rome to be more than simply the leader of the Catholic Church in Western Europe and in the larger world, and instead take a look at the idea that the church is going to be challenged in how it does business, especially by many of the lay, meaning non-church owners and controllers of large pieces of real estate in Europe, who traditionally believed that they had the right to control individual parish churches in their territories. The Bishop of Rome is going to have to take a stand against that and make a change, and in this case we're going to talk about what's going to be called the rise of an idea of a papal monarchy. The idea that the papacy is going to see itself as yet another of the temporal worldly leaders, but in this case with special spiritual authority that goes with it. With that idea, remember we had raised earlier this concept, what was called the Petrine supremacy. And that was the idea within Western European Christianity that the Bishop of Rome, as the inheritor of the power of St. Peter, one of the chief apostles of Christ, who had died in Rome, based on many different things, including the interpretation of some scripture, St. Peter was going to then be the successor. And anybody who saw themselves as the successor to St. Peter would then, of course, take on the idea that they were going to be the spiritual leader of Christianity on earth. That idea goes back to the 5th century or so, and it gets more and more solidified by about the year 600 in many places in Western Europe, though in many places in Eastern Europe and outside of Europe, this idea that the Bishop of Rome was able to speak and interpret everything for all was not accepted. And we'll see this later on when many different groups within Europe, as well as on the periphery of it, are not going to accept that the Bishop of Rome has this special doctrine, this special control of all of them. They're going to see and assert that they have their own right to interpret Scripture in a different way if they wish to. And more especially, we'll see that this emerges later on in Byzantium, because the Roman Catholic Church that was in Rome did not have control over the Byzantine Orthodox Church under the Byzantine emperors, and they're going to come up with a separate interpretation and in many ways reject the idea that the Bishop of Rome is, by virtue of being above the tomb of St. Peter, somehow heading the church. But we also had that same problem with within Islam of the idea of the caliph, who was in charge. That was a key element that in many religions continues to be an issue. Also, remember that the Pope had created this territory. Several chunks of territory, physical territory, had been given to the papacy by Charlemagne in the 9th century, and now the Bishop of Rome is not only a spiritual leader but also a landlord, and that's going to be a confusing issue for many as we move forward. Traditionally, in many places in Europe, the church had a sort of a symbiotic and a relationship where they were close to the elite of local areas, and the elite relied on the church relied on the local elites, and they were mutual cooperating sort of a network throughout many years of European history. In that process, though, many of the elite families had taken it upon themselves to nominate or promote various men and women to be the heads of various churches or abbeys or monasteries in their territory. In other words, the laity, the non-Christians, the Christians but who are non-leaders of the church, the laity, the outside people, were going into the church and appointing personnel, and that was in many ways a very contravening thing, because in theory, if the Bishop of Rome is going to lay claim to the idea of controlling all of Western European Christendom, and then local kings and queens are appointing people to positions in the church, well, those are sort of mutually contradictory. Is the Bishop in Rome in charge of everything? Or are they just rubber stamping some of the ideas and decisions made by people around them? This is what's called lay investiture. That's where local politicians would usually nominate family members or friends to be in various positions in the church, and then essentially the Bishop of Rome was expected to kind of just rubber stamp those. That is going to be a difficult issue, and it's going to come to the head in this century that we're about to talk about. In the 11th century, there are a remarkable series of bishops of Rome, all of them very shrewd, very well organized, with a clear sense of mission. And in many ways, each one of them is going to make a claim to reinforce the idea that's very simple and very powerful. Here's how it goes. if I am the Bishop of Rome, if I'm responsible for controlling and leading the church into the future, I need to be essentially the CEO, the CFO, and the president of this organization. I need to have my personnel in the places where I think they should be. I need to hire and fire and promote and translate, move people around. I need to make sure that this is a successful venture. I need to put the best people and personnel in the best positions. But now I'm looking out and I see many of these local leaders, kings and queens and dukes and counts and emperors, who are putting into positions of power in my organization their people. The laity, the outsiders, are investing their people with power in my corporation, in my unit. There's the showdown. And what the Bishop of Rome is going to do is have that showdown. Am I the chief CEO and CFO and leader of the organization, or am I not? And the most famous story is that of Pope Gregory VII and his struggle with Emperor Henry IV of Germany. Henry IV is also going to be the Holy Roman Emperor. He's King of Germany as well. So the idea here is a bishop in Milan, Italy, a big city, dies. Henry believes that he has the responsibility of naming the next person to take the position as the Archbishop of Milan. Pope Gregory says, no, it's my church, my organization, I'm going to do that. So they go into a very significant squabble. It's called the Investiture Controversy of 1077. In essence, here it is. It's a showdown. Is the Pope in charge of the church, or is he simply a figurehead that does what the elite people of Europe want? In this case, Gregory VII has a series of documents that he left behind explaining very carefully what he believed his mission was as the leader of the church. And in no uncertain terms, there's no ambiguity here at all. He believes that it's his mission to clean up the church, to run it as it is needing to be done, and exclude the power of the local kings and queens, who in many ways oftentimes have used the church to kind of dump friends and relatives into positions of power. Drinking buddies, good-for-nothing nephews and nieces, things like that. That is not putting people into the church for all the right reasons, but for the elite, they can take some of their lesser members of their family and put them in a place of great security and prestige and never have to worry about them again. This is the showdown. Henry says he's in charge of putting churchmen into places. The Bishop of Rome says he is. Ultimately, Henry gives in. The Bishop of Rome has a tool, a very powerful tool. What Gregory can do is he can throw the king out of the church. The technical term is excommunication. And what Henry does then is once he's thrown out of the church, here's the secret. Remember, all those oaths of feudalism, the lord having homage from the people underneath them using their land, the vassals who are using their fief, right? Henry is the head of a huge network of feudalism. All those feudal oaths are only valid between Christians. Now that the Bishop of Rome has thrown Henry out of the church, do all the people who are holding territory underneath him owe him their loyalty, their tax revenue, their military support? It certainly opens the door. Henry races to see the Bishop of Rome at a palace up in the mountains in the Alps. He begs for forgiveness, is let back into the church, and now, of course, those oaths of fealty and all that manorial feudalistic stuff comes back into play because Henry's back in the church. But in a few years, Henry transgresses and goes the wrong way with the Bishop of Rome again, gets excommunicated, and the process starts all over. Germany essentially is involved in a civil war for the next 100 years, or next 50 years or so, and eventually is going to be settled in an agreement later on, 2 generations later. But in the meantime, Holy Roman emperors in Germany become relatively toothless. They don't have much power. They may have a title, but the ability of the Bishop of Rome to reassert his authority over the church is now maintained. Take a look at this very key element of medieval development, where for once the Bishop of Rome is now going to consolidate all his power against the lay outsiders who want to put people into his church. Take a close look at this reading and make sure that you take a look at some of the practice exam questions.